Hi, Andrea. Hi, John. Oh, we got two Johns,
Hi,
John
good
Blejo and
afternoon.
John Ogden. Thank you for joining. And hey, Andrea, thanks for joining.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello. Hello, John.
And then we got Stephanie Dosiak. Stephanie, thanks for joining. Appreciate it.
Hi, Mark.
Great seeing you. So I'm sure people will filter in. We're going to get started. Being we're recording, and this is going to be put on our website. Everybody on here is a BIANYS member, so I don't want to confuse you with explaining what. Oh, except for John, but yeah, John, you're a BIANYS guest. But a quick overview. BIANYS is the Business Incubator Association of New York State. We are a trade association comprised of over 120 incubators. I believe it's 124 right now, incubators and accelerators across New York State. It's a member-led trade association where the membership elects the board and directs what our activities should look like throughout the year. We come together in our annual meeting, which this year is June 4th, 5th, and 6th in Buffalo. And throughout the year, we put out a monthly newsletter to keep members apprised of what is happening in incubation or in the startup community around the state. And we usually hold either in person or virtual webinars and opportunities for our members to learn about some of the programs that are out there that are available to their startups. And so today, I'm really excited to be joined by Dr. Greg Evans from the National Cancer Institute's SBIR Development Center. He is the program director and a team leader of a number of program directors that have special disciplines within the National Cancer Institute, everything from cancer biology, imaging, behavioral medicine, and and specifically Dr. Evans does a great job of doing outreach to make sure that the companies that could benefit from America's Seed Program are best positioned and are aware of the opportunities that are available to them. New York State does a great job of our universities and our incubators do a great job of accessing SBIR and STTR funding. But there's still always some heavy lifting to make sure that companies are aware and are prepared to take advantage of the program. So, Dr. Evans, thank you for joining us. I was able to see your presentation at Cornell Wild Medicine probably about 6 months ago. I went, to learn more about the program, and I really thought that our membership would really benefit from hearing from you. So, thank you for joining us today.
Sure, and thanks for the invitation, Mark. I appreciate it. And also thanks to Mike Grotowski for the help with logistics. So if we can get the slides up, I'll go ahead and get started. Fantastic. So I'm going to give an overview this afternoon of the National Cancer Institute's small business programs, in particular the SBIR and STTR programs. And I think I have about 50 slides, but some of them I'm not going to spend much time on at all. And you will have access to both the slides and I believe the video recording of this event for your use later. So please don't bother trying to write down things that are on the slides. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So these are the two programs I'm going to talk about, SBIR, which stands for Small Business Innovation Research, and STTR, which stands for Small Business Technology Transfer Research. The main difference between the two, and hopefully you're somewhat familiar with both already, is that with STTR, you're actually required to have, as part of the project, a partnership with an academic lab, whereas with SBIR, that's an optional feature. Next slide, please. The outline I have for this talk has three parts. First, I'm going to go through some NIH-wide aspects of the SBIR and STTR programs. this is for people who may be working in biotechnology, but not working in the cancer field. The other parts of the National Institutes of Health also have SBIR and STTR programs. So that first part is really for your benefit. With the second part of the talk, I'm going to drill down into some National Cancer Institute specific aspects, including funding levels and special programs we have other than research funding to help you commercialize your products. And then the third part of the talk is really all about what I just said. We have a very large number of things that we offer other than research funding, everything from mentorship to entrepreneurship training and helping you raise money from the private sector, all to help you commercialize products. Next slide, please. Next slide. So these are the 27 institutes and centers at the National Institutes of Health. I work for the National Cancer Institute, which is the largest institute, shown here in red. And again, if you happen to be interested in applying for one of these programs, but you're not working in the cancer space, all of these other institutes in orange here also have SBIR and STTR programs. So you should reach out to somebody who works in one of those institutes to get their perspective on this program, which is going to be similar to mine, but maybe not identical. Next slide. So these are congressionally mandated programs. SBIR has been around since 1982, STTR 1991. And for the fiscal year that ended about 6 months ago in NCI, we had $178 million of SBIR funds to distribute to the community and $25 million of STTR funds for a grand total within the National Cancer Institute of $203 million for that last fiscal year. And then NIH-wide, the number shown in black at the bottom right was $1.3 billion. So it's really quite a lot of money that represents the NIH portion of America's seed fund. Next slide. So eligibility for these programs, the features of the eligibility are shown here. So the applicant must be a small business concern that is a for-profit business, 500 or fewer employees. And the difficult part for some companies is shown on the far right here, and it has to do with the ownership structure. So we can use all of the SBIR and STTR funds that we have access to for companies that are majority owned by individuals. And then within SBIR, we can also spend a portion of the funding that we have. I believe it's about 25% on venture-backed companies. And there's some more detail provided on the right there that I won't go into. The awards are always made to the small company. Next slide. So why should you as a small business be interested in seeking some of this funding? Number one on the far left, this is non-dilutive capital. You don't see any dilution of your shares. You don't lose any shares, beyond the structure you currently have. It is not a loan. You do not have to pay the money back. Intellectual property stays with you. The government is not after your intellectual property. This is just an assistance mechanism, in my case, to help small companies develop new cancer products for the marketplace. These awards provide recognition, verification, and visibility, and they really can help you raise money from the private sector, when investors see that you've been sort of given the NIH peer review stamp of approval when you win one of these awards. Next slide. And so now I'm going to drill into the NCI specific programs. No, it's okay. Go ahead. So in the NCI, we manage these two programs a little bit different than most of the other institutes at NIH. And the main difference is that we have a central office here where all we do is manage these two commercially focused programs. So these are all of our current scientific staff on this slide. And you can see some of their expertise levels, expertise areas listed there. some folks like myself are kind of generalists, that cover lots of different areas, and other folks are more focused on therapeutics or on diagnostics. We have a couple people who, Jen Lowe and Linda Zane, who really only do diagnostics. Next slide. And these are our support staff. Next slide. So we have 6 core activities in our office. One of them is central oversight over all of our active awards. And, we have more than 400 active awards at this point. We help, the second part of our duties are shown here as guidance. What part of my job is like working a help desk. So, part of my job is to help you as an applicant prepare these applications and to build them in a way that's competitive for funding. The third area is I do outreach education events, which is really what I'm doing right now. And then we do develop new funding opportunities in the fourth area, and often in very narrowly focused areas, which I'll say a little bit more about with our contract opportunities a little bit later. We have a networking function where we, spend a lot of time helping our awardees interact with investors, as an example, and raise money from the private sector, which is really critically important, as I'm sure you all know, to speed commercialization. If that doesn't happen, then the products are usually not going to get commercialized. And then finally, as I've already hinted at already, we offer a lot of training and things other than research funding to help small businesses become smart about commercialization. Next slide. And these are really all of our core activities again, but just to highlight in this slide that for everything we do, we have a metrics-driven approach where we are always evaluating the effectiveness of what we're doing. We spend a lot of effort now in communications and outreach. I'm not especially involved in communications part, but we have other people in our office who only do communications. And then we have put a lot of effort recently into diversity and inclusion as well. Next slide. This is a snapshot of our portfolio as of a few years ago. And really everything across the cancer spectrum is represented here. The big areas are cancer therapeutics, in vitro diagnostics, imaging devices, and then several smaller areas. Next slide. This is one success story, a company that we funded about 12 years ago, I guess, and actually even before that. And they developed a antibody drug conjugate called Trovelvy with help from SBIR funding. And I guess the award was in 2012, and that eventually became FDA approved, and this company was bought out by Gilead for $21 billion. So, this doesn't happen with all of our companies, but it's happened with a good number of them. Next slide. What are the differences between the two mechanisms? I kind of hinted at this at the outset, but there are 3 main differences. One has to do with partnership, and this is what I mentioned at the outset. So STTR requires a university partner. SBIR, for SBIR, it's optional. Second area is division of labor. So with STTRs, you can outsource much more of the work. Up to 60% of the work can be done in an academic lab under a subcontract through an STTR award. In contrast with SBIR, it's only about a third of the work that you're supposed to outsource in phase 1 and up to half in phase 2. So the real sweet spot for STTR is where you have a maybe an invention that was made at a university, you then spin out a company, and then you seek STTR support to work on commercialization of that product, and part of the work is done at the company and part in the academic lab. The third area of difference has to do with the PI's primary site of employment. For SBIRs, the PI must be a majority employee of the company, whereas with STTR, the PI can be either with the company or with the academic institution. Next slide. So primarily we use SBIR and STTR grants in the NCI for these two programs. Approximately 70% of our award dollars go out the door in the form of a grant. In contrast, we also do contracts. Now, the main difference between the two is that with the grants, there are 3 regular receipt dates every calendar year. So that's just a permanent fixture of our program. And it's really, a permanent fixture NIH wide, not just for NCI. But we also offer what we call NCI initiated SBIR solicitations. And those are depicted on the right here. And these are in the form of SBIR contracts. The main difference with those is that those are narrowly focused technical areas, and they sort of represent the intersection of NCI priority areas as far as science and product development with areas that have strong commercial potential. So these are always going to be, we think, areas of interest to the commercial sector. And the way that we manage SBIR contracts is that we have 1 solicitation per year, usually comes out in the summer, that has 10 to 15 of these narrowly focused technical areas. And I'll show you some examples of those in a minute. Next slide. So as far as the kinds of awards that we offer in NCI through these programs, the upshot is we have 3 serial awards totaling $7 million. So it all starts at the beginning with a phase 1 award on the far left here. This is a proof of concept study for which NCI will pay up to $400,000 total costs over what's usually a 12-month project period. That $400,000 is a combination of the direct costs that that is the real money that you spend for research, plus the indirect costs or overhead costs, and then plus the fee that you are allowed to ask for as a small business. So just really a profit. And the NIH caps that fee at 7% of the combined total of direct plus indirect. And so bottom line is all 3 of those cost categories can add up to $400,000 for an NCI phase 1 award. And then after you've completed phase 1, you can apply for a phase 2. We will pay up to $2 million for a phase 2 SBIR or STTR grant. These are what we call full research and development efforts that are headed towards the marketplace. So as an example, for a cancer drug project, the phase 2 grant can involve anything that will get you to an IND submission with FDA. The phase 2 applications do require a fairly rigorous commercialization plan. And those projects, phase 2 projects, are typically 2 to 3 years' time. So right now at NIH, you can actually apply directly for the phase 2. It's called a direct to phase 2, and skip the phase 1 if you feel like you've already done a phase 1 equivalent worth of work. And to make that decision, you're welcome to talk to a program officer here at NIH to help you make that judgment. Okay, so I've told you can apply for a phase 1 or a direct to phase 2 from the get-go. You can also apply for a phase 2 after you've completed a phase 1. And then sort of the last option here is shown in the center of the slide, which is called a fast track. And that is where you combine the phase 1 and the phase 2 in the same application. And so for a fast track, we would pay up to $2.4 million, which is just the total of those 2 caps. And a fast track would be 3 to 4 years' time. All right, and then the last award that we offer that's really shown here is on the right part of the slide, and that's called a phase 2B Bridge Award. And to be eligible for that one, you have to have already completed a phase 2 award with it, actually with any part of the federal government that has an SBIR program, but it has to have been a cancer-focused project. And so our Phase 2B program is an extension of the Phase 2, and it's also a matching fund program. So to be competitive for our Phase 2B, you have to bring to the table at least a 1-to-1 match from the private sector, or even from a state government, a state-based innovation fund is fine as well. It's actually, the matching funds have to come from any non-federal government source. And we believe that that program helps incentivize investors to come into these projects a little bit earlier. And for our Phase 2B award, we will award up to $4.5 million over 3 to 4 years time. And typically these Phase 2B projects involve clinical studies, it's the kind of work that the company definitely needs to get to for commercialization, but they often have not been able to do so just with that first Phase 2 award. Next slide. All right, these are all of our funding opportunities. I should have changed the date at the top to 2024, but even though it says 2023, almost all of these solicitations are republished every year. So all of these are still active is the bottom line. Okay, so the real bread and butter for us as far as the solicitation that pulls in the most applications is the first one on this slide. It's called the Omnibus, the NIH Omnibus SBIR and STTR solicitations. So there are actually 2 solicitations for SBIR and 2 for STTR, and all 4 of those are republished every year, roughly in May. And so right now we're in March, so in a couple of months there'll be a new one of these that'll have a 24 after the PA instead of the 23 as shown on this slide. So the reason why there are 2 solicitations for each mechanism is that one of them says clinical trial not allowed, and the other one says clinical trial required. And the reason why NIH has 2 solicitations for SBIR, as an example, is that they've recently raised the bar for requirements if you are doing a clinical trial. And so they decided to do it as 2 solicitations. The situation for STTR is the same. And importantly, on the far right of the slide, there are 3 receipt dates every calendar year for that first solicitation set of solicitations. And those receipt dates are January 5th, April 5th, and September 5th. And those receipt dates apply to all of those types of awards. Not all of them, but most of the ones I went through on the last slide. Let's see, the next 3 lines on this slide are sort of targeted grant solicitations, which I'm not going to go through in detail, but they are indeed grants. The second one from the bottom are the SBIR contracts. And as I mentioned, these are published every summer. So yeah, there we go. And the mix of topics in the contract solicitation is different every year. And so I can't actually show you the ones we're going to publish this year because they haven't been fully approved yet. But those topics will be published in the July-August timeframe, and so you will be able to see them then. And then the last solicitation on this slide is the Phase 2B Bridge program that I just described. That is the matching fund program, and that one is supported by a special standalone solicitation that's published usually in April every year. So that'll be coming out next month. And then the deadline for that one is typically August. So next slide. Just to highlight some differences between grants and contracts, and I've already touched on this a little bit, especially the first line here. So with the grants, generally you're free to design your own research, design your own products, and then send in your request for funding support. with the contracts, the technical areas are at least partly defined by us. The place that peer review is done is a little bit different in the two cases. For the contracts, the peer reviews are set up within NCI, whereas with the grants, there's a separate part of NIH called the Center for Scientific Review that sets up all the peer review panels. And then regarding questions, so with a grant application, you can talk to me anytime in advance of submission, and I can help you to the extent I have time, craft your application. The allowance for interactions with program staff is a little less, it's a little more limited with the contracts by contrast. Receipt dates I've already gone through. With the contracts, there is, set aside money behind each one of the topics that we publish. So I think, you are at a competitive funding advantage to apply for the contract compared to the grant if your company happens to be working in the space defined by one of those contract topics. And then there's, let's see, basis of award. There's peer review for both types of awards, although with contracting, it's a little bit different because you go through this negotiation process before award. And then with the contracts, there's a lot more reporting that's done, a lot more interaction with program staff, which we think is a good thing. So one thing that we like about contracts is that the NCI folks who put together the peer review panels always put a lot of business people on those panels. And that happens to a greater extent with the contracts than with the grants. So that's one reason why we like the contracts. Next slide. So these are the contract topics that we published last year. Just to give you some examples, you'll see that they're quite broad. They cover almost the whole NCI mission area, some in therapeutics, some on diagnostics, probably some digital health in there somewhere. Next slide. And then these are a few individual examples. This one was on flash radiation therapy. Next slide. A couple on diagnostics. Next slide. Preclinical model systems for cancer research. Next slide. IT and bioinformatics. Next slide. And then I think this is my last example slide for the contracts. And so with these contract solicitations, one thing that's a little bit different compared to the grants is that the NIH sort of stipulates at a high level the path that we want you to take to develop these new products for in our case, the cancer marketplace. And so we list what we call deliverables, which are basically steps of research that we want you to go through to develop and validate your product and take it to market. We don't, really get down in the weeds and stipulate everything that you should do. We still allow room for you to innovate, but we do have, a few more stipulations as far as pathway to marketplace with contracts compared to grants. Next slide. A little bit more detail on our bridge program. Let's see here. I think I pretty much covered this. Next slide. A few years ago, we did an evaluation of this program. So we've been running this matching fund program since 2009. And when we did this evaluation in 2017, we determined that for $51 million in NCI funding across 21 awards, that had been matched with more than 4 times that amount of money from the private sector. So $220 million, or a overall leverage of about 4-to-1, which we were quite pleased with. And the matching funds came from venture capital in blue on the right, large company strategic partners in gray, and even angel investors in dark orange. Next slide. So I'm going to close out the talk here, the prepared remarks with I'm going to highlight some of the things we offer small companies who have won awards with us other than research funding to help them commercialize their products. And most of what I'll mention are NCI specific resources, but toward the end, I'll mention some NIH wide resources as well. Next slide. So these are some of the things that we offer that are listed here. And it kind of breaks them out by the stage at which they're offered. You can see that all of the programs represented by green horizontal bars at the bottom of the slide are really offered at the SBIR Phase 1 award stage. So you kind of have to get a Phase 1 grant or contract awarded to have access to all of those programs. In contrast, and I'll go through some of the individual programs in a minute. In contrast, the application assistance program shown on the left is a program that we and some other institutes at NIH offer to help first-time applicants get a little bit more assistance in writing their application and getting help with it. They won't write the application for you, but they will just provide a little bit extra assistance if this is something you've never done before and could use a little extra help. And access to that application assistance program is via an application basis, but it's a shorter application, less burdensome than a full grant application. Next slide. This is again kind of a summary slide. Next slide. So now I'm going to go through some of the individual programs we offer. Again, these are things other than research funding. So this first one is called Investor Initiatives, and this is really sort of a business plan competition where we invite all of our awardees to participate. And then at the end, the way that it works is that a short business plan is submitted by all applicants. Those business plans go in front of a non-NIH committee of business people. You can see on the left column here that these are reviewed by folks from pharma and venture capital companies who have expertise in the oncology space in particular for us. And so what happens is that those folks will score the applications. They will send them back to us, and we will identify approximately 35 companies that we will support financially to go to investor events and give pitches and enter into due diligence discussions and hopefully make progress towards raising money. Next slide. Some more detail on that. So we've been running this program for a number of years, and I won't go into details, but we've had a number of success stories come out of this effort. So we're very, very high on investing our own time in helping our awardees raise money from the private sector. Next slide. Another opportunity we offer in the entrepreneurship training category is called Innovation Core at NIH, or I-Core at NIH. This is a 10-week entrepreneurship class that's available on an application basis. And the way that we pay for it basically is we supplement your grant with about $60,000 or so to pay for your participation in this class. And what is this class? It basically allows you to refine your product to market fit, if you will. So you may have some ideas about why people will want to buy your product, but until you get out there and actually test them with interviews of people in the marketplace, you don't know that's a fact. So when you go in this class, you're required to do roughly 100 interviews with stakeholders in the space that your product falls in. And based on the input that you get, that can often lead to a pivot or a change in the design of your product that might make it a better fit with the marketplace. So this is a very valuable course. It's also very intensive. And the way that we run it is that each SBIR or STTR Phase 1 awardee is supposed to name 3 people from their company or from the general space they're working in to participate as a team in this class. And then they send in the application, and if it's accepted for the class, then it's about a 10-week class, as I said. And so typically, let's see, right now, I think we're doing either 2 or 3 cohorts, 2 or 3 classes. So it's the 10-week class times 3. So we are now offering it to roughly, I think, 75 companies per year across NIH. There are other institutes besides the NCI that participate in this. Next slide. So we also offer workshops on federal resources to help you commercialize your products. We do this every couple of years. Next slide. I'm going to try to finish up in the next 5 minutes or so we can have at least 15 minutes for questions. We do a peer learning and networking webinar series where basically you can learn from more experienced entrepreneurs that we have already awarded. Next slide. This one is similar, but it's focused on C-level executives. Next slide. We have a program to allow you access to the FDA at an early stage to get informal feedback from FDA staff on what the regulatory requirements will be to commercialize and market your product. And that's what this CARE program is all about. Typically, this one has about 1 deadline per year. And the way that it works is that companies can apply to participate in this. And if they're accepted, then they will have an opportunity basically to interact with FDA. I believe there's some sort of webinar that's involved, and you'll get an opportunity to ask questions of FDA, and you'll get good responses back. But again, this is for early stage feedback. This would happen way before a pre-IND meeting, as an example. Next slide. One of our newer programs has to do with mentoring from seasoned business people. This one is somewhat different than the programs I've already mentioned, but again, it's all about mentoring companies on commercial aspects. Next slide. We have a women's innovation network to sort of be we like to think that we are a champion for leadership by women as entrepreneurs. And we have set up this program over the past couple of years to be champions for women as entrepreneurs and hear their views and provide career mentorship as well. Next slide. Next slide. So taking these sort of programs to the NIH level, sort of beyond NCI, and this will be important for any of you who are not working in the cancer space, but you want to tap into NIH, SBIR, and STTR resources. So this applicant assistance program, I already mentioned, this provides a little bit of extra help in preparing first-time applications. Next slide. It takes a lot of time to put these applications together in a competitive way. So if any of you are about to launch into this, I encourage you to start early. Next slide. So the NIH offers, let me say it this way. SBIR and STTR funds in general they're supposed to be at NIH for biomedical research, and you can't use them for things like a intellectual property consultant or a regulatory consultant. But we realize that those things are critically important for commercialization. So the NIH has carved out what it calls technical and business assistance mechanisms or programs to offer a limited amount of money for those business-focused purposes. And so for these, you can apply for these this TABA funding, as it's called, either at the phase 1 award stage or the phase 2. And there's two ways you can do it. You can either put some funding in your grant request. So for phase 1s, it's $6,500. For phase 2s, it's $50,000. That's one way to do it. Or you can not put money in your application, but then after your application is awarded, you can apply to a central NIH place to tap into these kinds of resources. And the NIH will pay a contractor to, for example, mentor you in regulatory or intellectual property, or to do these TABA needs assessments that are mentioned here. Next slide. So this TABA needs assessment that can be delivered for phase 1 awardees at NIH can provide feedback on all of these things listed, which can be very, very valuable at an early stage for a company. And again, this TABA needs assessment is provided by a contractor that the NIH supports, and you can gain access to this if you, number one, have a phase 1 award, and number 2, you've applied to participate in this needs assessment. We've had a lot of good feedback on this so far. Next slide. And then we have one other NIH-wide program that we call the Commercialization Readiness Pilot. And again, the purpose is to support those business type costs, not biomedical research, but things like IP or regulatory consultation or reimbursement consultation. And the NCI will pay up to $250,000 for one of these applications. And there's a link in the bottom right of the slide that describes that program. Next slide. Next slide. Just to mention, before I close, a couple of newer NCI programs. So for phase 1 SBIRs, generally to be competitive for funding, you have to have some sort of preliminary data. But this program called the NCI SBIR Concept Award is different because there is no preliminary data needed, and it's really not even wanted. This is really just ideas, disruptive ideas for technology development. In particular, this one is focused on rare and pediatric cancers. And but again, it's just for ideas and not, it doesn't have to be supported by data. And so for this program, this is sort of I guess we call it a phase 0 SBIR award. And we are currently awarding up to $300,000 for these concept awards. Again, they're meant to be a pre-phase 1 effort. Next slide. Next slide. So the last new program I'll mention is a small business transition grant. It's really designed as a fast track to help a postdoc transition from the academic setting to industry. And I'm just going to leave it at that. And if you're interested in this, feel free to reach out to me. Next slide. This is our website in the lower right, sbir.cancer.gov. Next slide. And that's me. And so I'm going to stop now. I want to say to everybody, thank you for listening. And I want to invite any of you who are interested in submitting an SBIR application, or if you have questions about anything I've mentioned, feel free to reach out to me and set up a one-on-one meeting. I'm happy to meet one-on-one with anybody who wants to talk about these things further. And so again, thanks for your attention. And I'm going to be quiet now and take any questions you might have. Thank you.
I think you're on mute, Marc.
Thank you for the great presentation, Dr. Evans. And I wasn't sure, John, was that you raising your hand or let me know that I was on mute? that I was on mute. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Evans? Just raise your hand.
I was actually wondering, can you apply to multiple agencies at the same time?
You can formally if they're different different applications. In other words, if the research that's being proposed is different. You're not supposed to send the same application to multiple agencies because that leads to the unnecessary repetitive use of peer review resources. However, the other comment I would make is that, speaking for my own office, we place a very high value on having small businesses be very focused with their efforts. And really, if they have multiple product development ideas in mind, we want them to prioritize them and to seek funding for the first priority first until it gets, that one gets funded and that work gets underway. And after that, we're perfectly fine with the company submitting a second SBIR application around a different product area. So what I'm trying to say is that if you submit, let's take an extreme example, 3 applications for 3 different products to 3 different agencies, we will see that. And for us, frankly, that's perceived as a negative if it's a new business, because it suggests a lack of focus. And we want you to be focused.
Yep.
Great, thanks.
Hey, Greg, if I could ask you a question. This is John Blaho from New York. Tell Mike Weingarten I said hello.
Okay.
As Marc said, we're all involved in running incubators. So we have a lot of companies that have been successful in their phase 1. Probably half of the life science ones have gone through I-Corps at NIH. The big challenge that we're seeing right now is transitioning from the phase 1 to phase 2. And it's tough for us incubator operators to advise them on what are the biggest landmines that they have to be careful about when submitting from the phase 1 to the phase 2. If you could give us the top 3 mistakes or things you don't do, like how important are letters, what if you've raised a little bit of money, is that a negative? How should we advise our portfolio companies that are in that situation?
Okay, sure. Good question. So let's see, the most important things I would say are, number 1, having good data coming out of phase 1 that supports continuing the effort and that supports the research that's planned in phase 2. Number 1, you have to get the peer reviewers excited about your product development effort. And the same goes for the program staff here. But that's really important. Phase 2 requires a rigorous commercialization plan that's not required for phase 1. It's really important that that's prepared thoughtfully, and I think there's 11 different sections that they're all covered, and that, to take one example, to make sure you've got some either IP that's been filed or is there plans to file it, or even issued, but you have to discuss that, and it has to look likely that you'll have something that's protectable. In that same commercialization plan, you want to describe your private sector fundraising plans and efforts to date, to the extent that's applicable. Any letters from investors, even if they're somewhat soft, I think add value to an application. But, especially if the investor has studied the particular project in question, and if they can say that they're enthusiastic about following this effort going forward and that they might be willing to contribute in the future. That's a soft letter, but that's good. If it's a harder letter, more a firm commitment, maybe they've already committed funding, that definitely include that sort of letter. Letters of commitment and letters of reference are very much more important for the phase 2 applications than the phase 1. Kinds of letters that you should include are, I've already mentioned investors. Any of your subcontractors, they should have a letter saying they commit to do X, Y, and Z. If it, consultants, same thing, we commit to spend 10 hours on the project for this hourly rate, need letters from them. And then letters from key opinion leaders, ideally from people who won't be supported by the grant, but are working in the space defined by the product. And they can hopefully say that they've studied the product and the effort, and they think that it has value for medicine, value for the marketplace, etc. All of those letters are bring tremendous value. And then maybe another kind of letter is, if you have a potential commercialization partner, maybe either they're already a partner or they might be in the future. And if they have looked at what you're doing and they're excited about it, even if it's somewhat soft, they might pull the trigger in the future. Those kinds of letters are also very helpful.
So, in the life science space, a lot of the companies, their business model is exit by acquisition.
Sure.
And, they're struggling with, investors, and how do they position themselves to state that their plan is that, once they hit their milestones, their business development partner might likely acquire them. It seems like people don't want to talk about that. How do you handle that?
Yeah, I think, my advice would be you handle that by showing that you as a company are doing everything you can in a smart way to make your product development effort appealing to large companies. And that, can involve fundraising, meeting with lots of large companies, maybe. And then, just data and your research plan and your regulatory plan. You have to have all of your commercialization ducks in a row, I guess, to make yourselves an appealing acquisition target. So, so what you should not do, if you're a small business with SBIR funding and you're hoping to be acquired, is you cannot say that, we get a pass on covering all those things because some large company is going to do it. If you do that, it just doesn't help you at all. And it really hurts your application, the prospects of funding your application.
So the way that we advise the companies, and just let us all know, and we're all doing this, is we encourage the companies, if they have like an early adopter in a large company, this kind of mainly happens in the medical device space, which is much more difficult with the regulatory.
Right.
To do almost like a paid pilot, right? To see if their MVP or their prototype could be tested in the factory, to see if it could go into the company's workflow.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what we encourage them to do. And that
great.
Letters like that cover the business development and all the things you're doing. You're not really saying that there's exit by acquisition, but clearly, there's an opportunity there if this thing takes off, right?
Yep.
But that's what we advise them. I'm not sure if that's, appropriate or.
I don't see any problem with that. I guess, frankly, we all know that any successful small business can either have their asset or their company acquired by somebody else. And so I'm sort of asking myself, is it necessary for them to say, our goal is to be acquired? In fact, I would probably advise not to say that, because you have to, because you don't know if that's going to happen. But when you say that, it's kind of like you're saying, well, I should get a pass on all of these.
Yeah, that's you hit the nail on the head of the double-edged sword of this.
Yeah. So, if I were talking to somebody about a phase 2 application right now, I'd probably suggest that they not say that our goal is to be acquired, because we all know that can happen. And so all you can really do is position yourselves for the marketplace, make yourself as appealing as possible with your data, with your, private sector fundraising, with your meetings, with your connections, with your regulatory plan, your IP, and then, it's going to happen. It's very likely to happen. So.
Very nice.
Greg, that was great. Really, I took a ton of notes. I'm sure everybody else did.
Great.
Really helpful. I've got to jump off. I've got to start up another call at 1, but really appreciated that. I would love to have your deck. There's a lot of info in there.
Sure.
Mark, thanks for organizing this.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So yeah, with that, you said you would make the deck available. We could send it out to everybody that was on the call. Depending, if you're okay with it, when we post the video, and this is now speaking outside of my realm of understanding, but as we post it to the website, if we could link the deck too, I'm sure there's gonna be some value there.
Sure.
Really appreciate your time today. There is so much information here that I need that deck too. Go over it again.
Yeah, I know it's a lot, and that's why I say, I invite anybody who wants to dig into this stuff a little bit more, especially around the context of their own product development effort, to meet with me one-on-one, because that will bring a lot more value to you, I think.
And I'm not going to speak for you, but we had a lot of biotech incubators on the call today. If you have 10, 15, 20, 30 companies that might benefit from this, I'm sure you could probably link up with another webinar that
Sure.
Dr.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Yep.
Great. All right. Well, thank you for your time, everyone. Thank
Okay.
you for joining, and we'll
Okay.
see you next webinar.
Sounds good. Take care,
Great day.
everybody.
Bye.